It happened. I've been exposed. Somebody pulled back the curtain and got to the truth. Somebody said something to me recently that I really didn't want to hear. Not because it was harsh or not because it was wrong, because actually it was right. And I knew it. They looked at me and calm with no agenda and simply said, "You should follow your own podcast." And I didn't respond. I just kind of smiled and moved on. But inside, my ego had plenty to say. So grab a cup of coffee, pull up a chair, let's get to it. Welcome to Mind Your Business. I'm Steve Wagner, and today we're going to somewhere that's very personal. Today I want to talk about the gap between what we teach and what we live by, between the wisdom we put out into the world and the wisdom we actually apply to ourselves. And more than that, I want to talk about what happens when someone holds up a mirror and the first thing you do is try to argue with your reflection. So let me set the scene. We were actually in the middle of a vibrant conversation, just catching up or basically discussing some disagreements. And I'm probably in the middle of talking with something I was wrestling with or I didn't want to do or something along those lines. And then basically this person looked at me and he said, "You should follow your own podcast." 7 words. That was it. And you know what I did? I froze. I basically locked up. I did nothing. I nodded and I changed the subject. Because something in me knew that if I opened that door, I'd actually have to walk through it. So I didn't respond to the statement, and that's kind of telling in itself. But here's the thing about people who do what I do, who coach, who teach, who speak, who put content out. We develop the skill of articulating truth, and we get really good at it, the language of growth. And sometimes that very skill becomes a hiding place. You can talk about awareness without being aware. You can talk about commitment without being fully committed. You can quote Marcus Aurelius and Proverbs in the same breath and still avoid the one conversation you need to have with yourself. The most dangerous form of self-deception is the kind dressed up as wisdom. Now, let me give you a window in what was actually happening inside my head, because I think you'll actually kind of recognize it. The ego definitely woke up, and it was ready for a fight. And it had all of its arguments ready to go. Argument number 1, the defense. And I would say, I do apply it. You don't see everything I'm working through. You don't have the full picture. Now, the second argument, that's the justification argument. Do you know how hard this is? Do you know the pressure, the complexity, the season I'm in? Cut me some slack. And another argument, and this is the sneaky one, it's reframing it as humility. Of course, I don't always get it right. I'm a work in progress. That's actually the whole point of the whole podcast. Now, you see that last one? That one almost sounded kind of wise, almost sounds self-aware. But what it really is doing is using the language of growth to avoid growth. Epictetus put it plainly. He said, you can't learn what you think you already know. And the ego's job is to convince you that you already know, that you're already there, so that you don't have to do the uncomfortable work of actually getting there. The ego doesn't fight truth with lies. It fights truth with almost truth. And what does the ego fear the most? It isn't failure. It's not criticism from the outside. It fears the moment you stop defending and start listening. Because once you actually hear it, really hear it, you can't unhear it. And then you have to decide what to do with it. That's why I didn't respond. And that's why I smiled and moved on. My ego actually bought me time, but time runs out because if you do the work long enough, if you've been in the room of honest self-examination even once, you know that statement doesn't go away just because I didn't respond to it. It follows you home. So I sat with it and I started doing what I actually teach people to do, an honest inventory, not a condemnation, an inventory. There's a difference. Condemnation says you're a fraud and look at the gap. Inventory says, look at what's actually true. And here's what's actually true. I have failed more than I have succeeded at applying these things I teach. Not by a little, by a lot. I've talked about presence and been distracted. I've talked about full commitment and lived in the ish. I've talked about responding, overreacting, and reacted. I've talked about self-awareness and been on autopilot. Scorecard of consistency, not very good. And I had to sit with that. Really kind of sit in it. without the exit ramp of, but I'm trying, or, but I've gotten better. Because here's what I've learned: you cannot receive grace until you stop arguing that you don't need it. Grace is not available to the person still building their defense. It meets the one who finally lowers their hands. There's a verse in Proverbs chapter 3, verse 5, and it goes like this: Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. Learn on your own understanding is exactly what ego does. It constructs a narrative where you're more aware than you actually are, more consistent than you actually are, more applied than you actually are. And you lean on that narrative like it's a solid ground. So here's where I landed. And this is the one part I don't want you to miss. I've failed more than I've succeeded, and that's true. And the successes, even the small ones, I have leveled up in ways that I can now see clearly. It's not a contradiction. That's how growth actually works. Viktor Frankl, writing from the most unimaginable suffering, said that between stimulus and response, there is a space. And in that space lies our freedom, our growth. Every time I've actually applied what I teach, my awareness has gotten a little sharper. Not because I'm disciplined enough to follow my own podcast all the time, but because the moments I did, the moments compounded. You don't need a perfect record to have real progress. You need honest accounting and the courage to keep going. Grace isn't absence of accountability. Grace is what makes continued accountability possible. Without grace, the inventory destroys you, and with grace, the inventory redefines you. In Colossians 3:23, it goes like this: Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart as working for the Lord, not for human masters. Whatever you do, not just things you get right, not just the wins, the whole effort, the attempts, the failures, the restarts. All this done with heart, all of it offered up, all of it within the frame of something bigger than your ego's report card. And here's what I know now that I didn't fully know before. The person who needed to follow their own podcast the most, well, that's actually me, not as a shame statement, as a calling statement. Because in the podcast was never just for the listener, it became the conversation I needed to have with myself, out loud, in public, on the record, so I couldn't escape it. Every episode I produce is me trying to close the gap, not perfectly and not completely, but honestly. So let me bring this home for you. Is there something in your life that someone has reflected back to you, something you smiled at and moved past that you haven't actually responded to? Is there a gap between what you believe and how you're living, between what you preach formally or informally and what you practice? Don't let the ego run your defense. Don't let it justify, don't let it even use the language of humility to avoid the real thing. Do the inventory with honesty, without condemnation. Give yourself grace, not as an excuse to stay where you are, but as the fuel to move forward. And know this: your failures aren't disqualifying, they're data. They're the friction that refines you, if you actually let them. In Proverbs 24:16, it says, Though the righteous fall 7 times, they rise again. 7 times, not 0 and not once, 7. The standard was never perfection. The standard was actually getting back up. Fall honestly, rise intentionally, and keep going. Thanks for being here. This is Mind Your Business, and I'm Steve Wagner. And if this one hit close to home, share it with someone who needs to hear it, or better yet, sit with it yourself first. And I'll see you next time. And keep your mindset strong.